Hello everyone, I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, it truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. First story. A couple of years ago, I flew back home to visit my family. It had been such a long time since I had taken a proper break, and my heart longed for familiar faces, quiet moments, and the comfort of people who knew me best. I had planned to spend about a week at home, then head to the coast for another week before returning for a final few days before flying back to my own life. I needed this escape more than I realized. Just before this trip, I had ended a long, drawn-out relationship that felt like a constant tug of war. It had been 7 months of trying and failing, 7 months of believing that if you loved someone enough, you were supposed to fight for them, but that belief only left me tired and hollow. One morning, I finally woke up and decided it was over. No more second chances, no more struggling to make something work that was clearly broken. I felt relieved, even as a faint sadness lingered in the corners of my heart. This chapter of my life was closed. I was ready to heal. When I arrived, my family could tell I wasn't quite myself. My body seemed determined to shut down, and I spent the first couple of days doing little more than sleeping. My mother, ever the caregiver, began to worry that there might be something physically wrong. She's a nurse, so concern came naturally to her. But I reassured her gently that I just needed time. A safe place. Somewhere quiet where my mind could finally begin to process the weight I'd been carrying for so long. By the third day, I felt lighter. The fog in my head had begun to lift. Before we left for the coast, I arranged to meet up with an old friend from grade school. We'd kept in touch over the years, exchanging holiday messages and the occasional phone call. I thought it would be just him and me, but he brought along another acquaintance I didn't know. I didn't mind. The more the merrier, I thought. We talked and laughed for a couple of hours, catching up on life, and then I felt it was time to head back. The quickest way home was through the backwards route. If I took the main road instead, it would add nearly 20 extra miles to the trip. I knew these roads well enough to feel comfortable, but I stayed cautious, keeping my eyes peeled for deer darting across the road. As I got ready to leave, I said goodbye to both of them. To the new acquaintance, I smiled and said the kind of polite thing you say when parting. If you're ever in my neck of the woods, look me up. Maybe we can grab a drink. He nodded and smiled back, and I went on my way, thinking nothing of it. About halfway home, an uneasy feeling crept into my stomach. It wasn't the kind of nausea that comes from food poisoning or motion sickness. It was different, heavier, as though my intuition was sounding a quiet alarm. I slowed the car down, just in time to see a deer in the middle of the road. I braked gently, my heart pounding at the near miss. As I continued, I noticed another car parked along the roadside, its headlights off. The queasy feeling in my gut deepened. Something felt wrong, though I couldn't quite place why. I decided it would be better to cut over to the main road after all, even if it meant a longer trip. I pulled into a gas station along the highway to settle my nerves. I sat there for several minutes, breathing deeply and staring blankly at the steering wheel, trying to shake the odd, lingering discomfort in my chest. I walked into the store, grabbed some water and ginger ale, and then returned to my car. Still, the queasiness persisted. Rather than going straight home, I drove around for a while, winding through familiar streets until the strange heaviness began to fade. Finally, I went home, curled up with a book for a while, and drifted into a dreamless sleep. The next morning, everything felt normal again. The unsettling feeling from the night before had dissolved completely. We left for the coast and the trip was lovely, filled with laughter, ocean breezes and the kind of peace I had been craving. 2 weeks later, we returned home. I still felt a bit fragile from the breakup, but I knew I was ready to begin cleansing my life of the lingering sadness and start fresh. The following day, as I sorted through old boxes and clutter, trying to clear out negative energy, I found my mind drifting. I didn't really want to think too deeply about anything. It felt better to let my hands do the work while my thoughts floated elsewhere. That afternoon my phone rang. I rarely get calls from unknown numbers, so my first thought was that there might be some kind of family emergency. The area code matched my cousin's, so I answered quickly, expecting her voice on the other end. Instead, it was the acquaintance I'd met at my friend's house 2 weeks prior. At first I wasn't alarmed. It was unusual for him to be calling, but not deeply concerning. He said he was at the airport. Distracted, I replied casually. "Oh, that's cool. Where are you headed?" He paused. "I just landed," he said. Confused, I asked again, "Where are you going?" That's when he said it. "I came to visit you." My stomach tightened. I didn't know what to say. "Wait, what?" "You came to visit me?" I asked, my voice sharp. He confirmed it calmly as though this was the most normal thing in the world. "Yeah, you said to look you up if I was ever in town." My pulse quickened. "That's just a polite thing people say," I told him, my voice trembling now with anger and unease. "It doesn't mean you should fly across the country to see someone you spent 2 hours with." He insisted he felt a deep connection with me, that he had nowhere else to stay and needed me to pick him up. I refused, telling him to find a hotel. He said he couldn't. He had spent all his money on a one-way ticket. My heart raced as panic set in. I wanted nothing more than to hang up, lock my doors and pretend this wasn't happening. But against my better judgment, I agreed to let him stay the night while he sorted things out, on the condition that he would be gone the next morning. When I picked him up, I handed him a pillow and blanket and told him he could sleep on the couch. As I turned to walk to my room, he asked if he could sleep in my bed. The words made my skin crawl. "No," I said firmly, "that's not going to happen. And don't try anything. I have a firearm." The next morning, I told him to start figuring out how he was going to get home. While I was at work, he blew up my phone with messages begging me to come home for lunch. I refused. When I returned that evening, I found that he had rearranged everything in my house, every single room, like some twisted attempt to take control of my space. My blood ran cold. When I confronted him, he didn't answer my questions, but instead demanded to know who I had been texting. "That's none of your business," I said, my voice icy. He exploded, shouting that I wasn't allowed to talk to other men, that I was heartless for rejecting him. I realized then how dangerous the situation had become. Calmly but firmly, I told him to pack his things. "You're leaving tonight," I said. "I'm calling a cab. You're going to the airport." He started yelling insults as he gathered his belongings. When he finally left, I locked the door behind him and sank to the floor, shaking. For weeks afterward, he continued to send me messages and call from different numbers. I blocked each one. Eventually the calls stopped, but I never forgot the way my stomach twisted that night on the backwoods road. As if my body had known before my mind ever could, is the second story. It was the middle of summer, and the night air felt thick and heavy, the kind of muggy heat that clings to your skin and makes it nearly impossible to sleep. My dad and I, both restless from tossing and turning for hours, decided to take a late-night drive to clear our minds. Growing up in rural Tennessee, I was no stranger to winding back roads and dense forests. Our little town wasn't even really a town, just a scattering of houses nestled along a single narrow road, miles from the nearest freeway or grocery store. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where fireflies lit up the night and silence wrapped around you like a warm blanket. That night, the stillness was even more profound. The only sounds were the low hum of cicadas and the crunch of gravel under our tires as we set out. We drove aimlessly for a while, the headlights cutting through the inky darkness as we navigated the curves and dips of the back roads. Eventually, we decided to head toward a scenic overlook my dad knew about, a hidden gem down a narrow 2-track road that twisted deeper into the woods. It wasn't a place many people knew about, just a small clearing with a breathtaking view of the valley below. The path was lined with a few dilapidated trailers, their windows dark and empty, as though the residents had long since vanished. There were rumors about this area, whispers of strange happenings and shadowy figures lurking in the woods. People in town liked to spin tales about inbred cults and territorial meth labs, stories meant to keep children from wandering too far. I didn't believe in any of that, at least not until that night. When we arrived at the gravel parking lot, the air felt different somehow, heavier, almost electric. My dad hesitated for a moment, his hand still gripping the steering wheel. "You sure you want to get out?" he asked softly. There was something in his tone that made me pause. My excitement to catch fireflies warred with a sudden, inexplicable unease, but I nodded anyway, clutching the old Tupperware container I'd brought along to catch the glowing insects. "All right," he said, forcing a smile, "but let's not stay long." As we stepped out of the car, the smell of damp earth filled my nose, mingling with the faint scent of pine. The world around us was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. We started down the narrow path that led to the cliff, our flashlights casting long, wavering beams of light across the underbrush. Not far in, we heard it, a distinct sound of heavy footsteps in the woods to our right. They were too deliberate, too heavy to belong to a deer, and there hadn't been bears in this area for decades. I froze, gripping my dad's arm, my heart pounding like a drum. He glanced at me, his expression calm but his eyes sharp with alertness. We pressed on, trying to shake off the unease. Out of the corners of our eyes, both of us thought we saw movement, a figure slipping behind a tree just as we turned our heads. Neither of us spoke, but the tension between us grew thicker with every step. When we finally reached the clearing, the view was as beautiful as ever. The moonlight bathed the valley in a soft glow, the trees swaying gently below, but we weren't alone. Standing near the edge of the cliff was a man, thin as a rail and perfectly still. He wasn't admiring the view or even glancing our way. Instead, he stood, perpendicular to the cliff, staring off into the forest, as though lost in thought, or waiting. My dad shifted uneasily beside me, then gave me a small nudge in the direction of the car. I didn't argue. As I turned to go, he shone his flashlight on the man, and what we saw made my blood run cold. My dad gasped and dropped the flashlight, the beam spinning wildly as it hit the ground. In an instant, he scooped me up in his arms and sprinted back toward the car with a speed I didn't think he was capable of. I didn't dare look back. My dad didn't speak until we were back in the car, speeding down the gravel road. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but I heard every word. His face? It looked like melted wax. My stomach churned. He explained that the man had no nose, just two dark holes where it should have been. His skin appeared warped, as though it had melted and reformed in a grotesque mask. Later, my grandmother would tell us over breakfast that there had been a meth lab explosion up in the hills a few months earlier. Survivors had fled into the woods, paranoid and desperate, protecting their makeshift operations with violent ferocity. Some people claimed they would attack anyone who wandered too close. I didn't sleep for days after that. Even now, years later, I can still picture that man standing there, silent, unblinking and utterly alien. I wonder what he would have done if we hadn't left when we did. Was he waiting for someone to stumble into his path? Or had we simply been unlucky enough to cross his line of sight? I'll never know. But one thing is certain. I'll never return to that overlook, no matter how many fireflies dance in the night. The third story. The afternoon sun was bright, but a cool breeze rolled in from the ocean, offering some relief from the heavy humidity that clung to my skin. I had decided to take a walk alone, earbuds in, music playing softly, as I wandered down a busy stretch of road in Myrtle Beach. I've always found these solitary walks to be therapeutic, a way to escape from the noise of the world and retreat into my thoughts. Being alone never really scared me, even as a young woman, because I trusted the light of day to keep me safe. But sometimes, danger doesn't wait for the dark. As I strolled along the sidewalk, my mind drifting between the rhythm of the music and the warm feel of the sun on my arms, I noticed a sedan turning sharply into the parking lot ahead. It moved with such aggression that it nearly collided with a passing car. The screech of brakes and a honk of a horn broke me out of my reverie. My first thought was that the driver must be late for something, A dinner reservation perhaps, and my attention returned to the music in my ears. But as I crossed the entrance to the lot, the driver waved at me. I nodded out of reflex, not wanting to appear rude, and kept walking. 2 blocks later, the uneasy sense of being watched crept into me like a slow chill. I glanced behind me and saw nothing unusual. Shaking off the feeling, I turned back toward the hotel, deciding it was probably time to head back anyway. That's when I heard the low hum of an engine behind me. The same sedan from before had pulled up alongside me, its windows down. The driver, an older man with thinning hair and a deeply lined face, spoke in a voice so low I could barely make out his words. "Hey, do you need a ride?" he asked, motioning for me to come closer. A cold shiver ran through my entire body. There was something in his tone, calm, deliberate, almost too quiet. Why was he whispering? The realization hit me like a wave. Had he been watching me this whole time? Had he pulled into the parking lot earlier because he'd seen me walking past? My instincts screamed at me to get away. I took a step back and said firmly, "No, absolutely not, I'm fine." My voice was louder than I intended, but I didn't care. His face twisted instantly, transforming from an inviting smile to something dark and vile. His eyes narrowed, and a flash of anger passed over his features like a storm cloud blocking out the sun. Without another word, he slammed his foot on the accelerator and sped off so quickly that his tires screeched against the asphalt. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I forced myself to keep walking, but every step felt heavy, every sound amplified. Even though I knew he had driven away, I couldn't shake the fear that he might circle back, that at any moment his car would come barreling toward me again. By the time I reached the hotel, I rushed inside, my breath shallow and quick. The safety of the walls felt like a warm embrace, but I couldn't stop replaying the encounter in my mind. What would have happened if I had been more trusting? What if it had been dark outside? Would I have felt the same chills running down my spine, warning me to keep my distance? Or would I have ignored my instincts, brushing them off as paranoia, only to find myself trapped in a situation I couldn't escape? I shuddered at the thought, realizing just how fragile safety can be. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, sleep felt impossible. I kept picturing the man's face, the way his features had twisted in anger when I refused him. There was no doubt in my mind that his intentions weren't innocent. Perhaps my firm rejection had startled him enough to abandon whatever plan he had. Or perhaps he was simply waiting for another opportunity, for someone more willing to step closer to his car window. The next morning, the sunlight seemed less comforting, its golden glow failing to erase the memory of those piercing eyes and that soft, almost conspiratorial whisper. I made a silent promise to myself to trust my instincts, to listen to the voice inside me that senses danger even when logic tries to quiet it. Myrtle Beach still holds beauty in my memory, the sound of waves, the smell of salt in the air, but it will always be tinged with the shadow of that moment when a stranger's quiet voice nearly became something far more sinister. The fourth story. When I was a child, my family often took trips to museums during our summer vacations. I remember one particular outing vividly, even though I must have been no older than 7 or 8 at the time. The day had been warm and cheerful, filled with laughter, as we explored ancient artifacts, wandered through exhibits of dinosaur bones, and enjoyed ice cream from a little stand outside. The museum grounds had benches and a small playground where children were running and playing, their joyful shrieks echoing through the open air. It was one of those rare moments in life where everything felt simple and safe. That's why what happened next has stayed with me all these years, a sharp contrast to the gentle warmth of that afternoon. As we prepared to leave, my family began walking toward the parking lot, which was just past the playground. That's when a sound pierced the air, stopping us in our tracks. A little girl was screaming, loud, desperate, and full of fear. "No, I don't know you! You're not my father!" Her voice cracked with raw terror. At first my mother and I exchanged glances, thinking perhaps the child was having a tantrum. Children often scream when they don't want to leave the playground, after all. But something about this girl's tone felt different. It wasn't the whining of a child resisting bedtime or pleading for another 5 minutes of play. It was primal fear. We turned to see a man crouched in front of her, his hand on her shoulder. He was speaking softly, trying to coax her into coming with him. "Come on, sweetheart," he said. "It's time to go home now." The girl shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "Please help me," she sobbed. "Call my mommy, I have her number, please." At that moment, my mother's instincts kicked in. She handed me her ice cream cone and marched over to the pair, her voice steady but loud enough for nearby adults to hear. "Excuse me," she said firmly. "Is everything all right here?" The man straightened up quickly, his expression flickering between surprise and irritation. "This is my daughter," he replied. "She's just tired and doesn't want to leave." But my mother wasn't convinced. She positioned herself between the man and the girl, gently placing a hand on the child's back as she spoke. "If that's the case, then you won't mind if I call her mother to confirm, will you?" she asked, pulling her phone from her bag. "I've taken a photo of you both, just in case." Her voice carried through the air, catching the attention of others in the area. The man hesitated. His eyes darted nervously toward the parking lot. "That's not necessary," he muttered. "We're fine." But my mother wasn't backing down. She crouched slightly to speak to the little girl, her voice soft now. "Do you know your mommy's phone number?" she asked. The girl nodded quickly, pulling a crumpled slip of paper from her pocket. My mother dialed the number as she led the child away toward a bench, keeping herself between the girl and the man. "Stay right there," she said sharply to him. But when she glanced back a moment later, he was gone. The girl's mother answered almost immediately. When she heard what was happening, her voice cracked with panic. "I'm on my way," she cried. Within minutes, we saw a woman running across the grass, her face flushed and wet with tears. The girl broke free from my mother's side and sprinted toward her, throwing her arms around her waist. My mother's shoulders relaxed, and she exhaled deeply as she approached the woman. Still cautious, she asked gently, "Are you her mother?" The woman nodded fervently, holding up her phone to show the call log as proof. By now a small crowd had gathered, murmuring in hushed tones about the man who had disappeared. The mother sobbed as she thanked my mum over and over again, her words tumbling out so quickly they were almost incoherent. "You saved her," she whispered. "I don't even want to think about what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." She offered to repay my mother for the ice cream we'd abandoned earlier, but my mum shook her head firmly. "Don't worry about that," she said softly. "Your little girl being safe is all that matters." Later that evening, as we drove home, my mother explained why she had spoken so loudly and taken the man's photo. If he really was her father, there would have been no harm done. But if he wasn't, then at least others could identify him later. Her words settled into me like a stone in a still pond, sending ripples of awareness outward. It was the first time I understood how fragile safety could be, and how important it was to trust your instincts when something felt wrong. That memory has stayed with me for years. Even now, when I see children playing at a park or hear their laughter in the distance, I sometimes think of that day. I remember the man's cold eyes and the way his presence felt wrong in the warm glow of that summer afternoon. And most of all, I remember my mother, standing tall, unflinching, and unafraid to speak up when it mattered most. She didn't have to be strong, but she was. I still feel a swell of pride when I think of her bravery. She wasn't a superhero or a trained officer, just a mother with sharp instincts and a kind heart. But that was enough to save a life. And in that quiet, unremarkable parking lot on a sunny summer day, she became the reason a little girl went home safe with her mother instead of vanishing into the unknown. The fifth story. It was one of those perfect summer afternoons that seem to stretch endlessly. The kind where the air is thick with the smell of pine and the sound of cicadas fills every corner of the campground. I was barely 5 years old, yet I can recall every detail with startling clarity. The bright orange of my little bike, the gravel crunching beneath its wheels, and the sheer excitement of riding without training wheels for the first time. My grandparents had invited our family to join them for a camping trip at Goose Pond in northern Alabama. Their RV, modest but cozy, felt like a palace to me. It had just enough space to squeeze us all in, and the trip had been one of laughter, campfires, and newfound freedom. After practicing for what felt like hours, I had finally mastered balancing on my bike without help. Bursting with pride, I begged my parents to let me and my older brother ride a short loop around the campground. The loop was small enough that my parents could see most of it from the RV, save for one turn that dipped briefly out of view. With a cautious nod, they agreed, warning us not to go too far and to stick together. We took off eagerly, the gravel road crunching beneath our tires as we pedaled side by side. The ride was uneventful at first. The warm air felt like a soft hug as we raced past campers and tents, our laughter echoing between the trees. When we reached the final turn, the one just out of sight from my parents, the world seemed to grow quieter, almost still. A car approached from behind us, its tires humming softly against the gravel. Out of habit, my brother and I pulled our bikes off to the side of the road to let it pass. The car slowed as it reached us. The man behind the wheel rolled down his window. He was middle-aged, with a kind smile and a calm voice that didn't match the chill beginning to creep up my spine. "Hey there, kids," he said smoothly. "I've got some candy in my car. Would you like to come over and get a piece?" For a split second I hesitated. I was young, and at that age candy felt like an irresistible offer. I remember my small feet shifting forward slightly, one hand still gripping the handlebar as my other hand reached out instinctively. But before I could take another step, my brother's hand shot out and clamped firmly on my shoulder. "Let's go," he said quickly, his voice sharp in a way I had never heard before. Without waiting for my reply, he tugged me back toward my bike. "Now!" he hissed. I stumbled, nearly dropping my bike in my hurry to climb back onto the seat. Together, we pedaled furiously, gravel spitting out from under our tires as we fled the man's car. Behind us, we heard the engine rev slightly before the car began to roll forward again. But instead of turning to follow us, it drove off in the opposite direction, disappearing around the bend. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. We didn't stop pedaling until the RV came back into view, its bright white frame a beacon of safety against the darkening tree line. When we finally reached the RV, my brother slid off his bike and leaned it against the side, his face pale and tight with worry. "What happened?" my mother asked, stepping down from the RV steps. She had sensed something was wrong even before we spoke. As I tried to catch my breath, my brother explained what had occurred. Her face went still, her eyes darkening with a mix of fear and anger. That night the campground felt different. The warm glow of the fire couldn't quite chase away the shadows lingering beyond the trees. My parents kept us close, their eyes darting to every passing car, every unfamiliar face. For the first time I understood that the world wasn't always safe, that some people hid darkness behind soft voices and friendly smiles. As the years passed, the memory never faded. Even as an adult, whenever I see children riding their bikes on quiet summer roads, I feel a pang of protectiveness. I think of that man, of how easily things could have gone differently if my brother hadn't been there, if he hadn't pulled me back at just the right moment. It's a moment frozen in time, a reminder of how fragile innocence truly is. I'll never know what that man's true intentions were, and I don't need to. All I know is that on that summer day, my brother saved me from a story that could have ended very differently. And for that, I am grateful beyond words. The sixth story. When I was 11 years old, life felt like one big adventure. My father, a retired military pilot, had given me the gift of seeing the world by flying standby to different places. One summer, we decided to vacation in Puerto Rico for 5 days. We were staying on a military base thanks to one of my dad's old buddies who managed the housing there. The condo we were given wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable, and the warm island breeze made even the simplest accommodations feel like paradise. My parents and I spent the first day exploring, eating tropical fruits and swimming under the golden sun. Everything felt perfect until night fell. I've always been uneasy in the dark. Even as a child, the stillness of night carried an edge of discomfort, as if unseen things were watching from the shadows. So, when it came time to sleep in the condo, I chose to lay on the living room couch instead of the guest bedroom. I told myself it was because I wanted to watch TV until I drifted off. But the truth was, I felt safer out in the open, where I could hear the soft murmur of my parents sleeping in the adjacent room. The first 2 nights passed without incident, but on the 3rd night, everything changed. I was curled up on the couch, watching a silly comedy to lull myself into relaxation when I heard it. A soft tapping on the large window behind me. My body froze. I told myself it was probably a tree branch swaying in the breeze, but there were no trees close enough to the window for that. Slowly, I turned my head and peered through the blinds, expecting to see nothing. Instead, I was met with the faint outline of a tall figure standing just inches away from the glass. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could feel his presence. Calm, patient, and uncomfortably deliberate. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring in at me. My heart slammed against my ribs as panic surged through me like a wave. I shot off the couch and bolted to my parents' room, shaking my dad awake. "There's someone outside," I whispered urgently. He grumbled, rubbing his eyes, convinced it was my imagination. But when I wouldn't stop tugging at his arm, he finally got up and checked. He found nothing. The window was empty, and the quiet night air showed no sign of an intruder. My parents told me to go back to sleep, assuring me it had probably been a dream, but I knew what I had seen. That night, sleep never came. I lay wide-eyed, clutching the blanket tightly, waiting for the sound of tapping to return. The next evening, I refused to sleep on the couch again and moved into the guest bedroom. There was a large window directly above the bed, and though I tried to ignore it, my eyes kept darting toward it as I lay there, my iPod playing soft music to calm my nerves. Hours passed, and I began to relax, lulled into drowsiness by the steady rhythm of my playlist. Then it happened. A loud, deliberate pounding against the glass above my head. I screamed and ran for my parents' room once again, shaking with terror. My dad sighed heavily, frustrated by what he assumed was another false alarm, but this time I refused to let him brush it off. Tears streamed down my face as I begged him to stay with me. He reluctantly agreed, sitting beside me on the bed for nearly an hour until I began to calm down. When he eventually returned to his own room, I lay frozen under the covers, headphones in, trying to block out every sound around me. But the banging came again, even louder this time, reverberating through the window and deep into my bones. I turned the volume on my iPod all the way up, tears rolling down my cheeks as I squeezed my eyes shut. It felt like hours before sleep finally claimed me. The next morning, my dad's friend, who managed the housing, took us out to lunch. During the ride back, I hesitantly told him about the tapping and banging on the windows. He chuckled softly and said, "Oh, that was probably Brian. He loves to mess with people." It turned out Brian, the teenage son of another military family we'd been spending time with, had decided to play pranks on me during the trip. My parents laughed it off, but I couldn't. Even knowing it was a prank didn't erase the fear I had felt in those long, silent hours staring into the darkness. That experience haunted me for years. Even now, as an adult, I sometimes find myself listening for soft taps on the window at night, my chest tightening with the memory of those sleepless nights in Puerto Rico. It's strange how easily fear can take root, how quickly the comfort of home can turn into a place of terror when you're convinced something or someone is watching. The 7th story. About 6 years ago, I found myself spending a quiet weekend at my parents' cabin with my close friend Tom. The cabin sat deep in the woods, nestled along a winding road that stretched for miles without a single street light. Nights out there felt thick and heavy, the air so still that every sound, every rustle of leaves or crack of a branch echoed like a warning. Despite the darkness, or perhaps because of it, we decided on a whim to visit a nearby Ojibwe casino about 40 minutes away. The thrill of an unplanned adventure felt too good to pass up. The drive there was easy enough. We laughed, talked about nothing in particular, and arrived at the brightly lit casino, where sounds of clinking chips and murmured conversations filled the air. Luck was on our side that night. We left with our pockets a little heavier after a few rounds of poker, and even treated ourselves to dinner with the winnings. By the time we climbed back into the car, it was past 1 a.m. Later than I had intended, a part of me regretted staying out so late, knowing the road home would be swallowed in pitch-black shadows. As we drove deeper into the forest, the only light came from the car's headlights cutting narrow beams into the darkness. The forest on either side of the road seemed to press closer, the dense trees hiding secrets in their shadows. About halfway back, Tom and I spotted two glowing green orbs ahead. I eased my foot onto the brake, slowing as a group of deer ambled lazily across the road. When the last one vanished into the woods, I exhaled, grateful I had been cautious. The car crawled forward as we crested a hill, the incline forcing the engine to work harder. That's when Tom let out a sharp, panicked cry. "Holy!" he started, his voice cracking. My eyes shot forward, and my blood ran cold. Standing directly in the middle of our lane was a woman. She was wearing a long white nightgown, her bare feet planted firmly on the asphalt. Her hair was black as ink, hanging limply around her face. She didn't flinch, didn't move, as the car screeched to a halt just 10 feet away. For a long moment, none of us breathed. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles pale, as Tom whispered, "What the hell is she doing out here?" The woman didn't answer. She didn't even look at us. Her face was blank, her eyes seemingly focused on nothing. The sight of her standing so still, so utterly out of place in the empty road, felt like something ripped from a nightmare. Slowly she stepped to the side, dragging her fingertips across the length of the car as she passed, her nails making a faint, screeching sound against the metal. Neither Tom nor I moved as we watched her in the rearview mirror. The woman didn't glance back. She kept walking, vanishing into the darkness as though she'd never been there at all. I wanted to drive away, to leave that eerie encounter behind, but something inside me resisted. "We can't just leave her out here," I murmured. "What if she's hurt?" Tom's hand shot out, gripping my arm tightly. "No," he said firmly. "We're not getting out. Let's just go." But my conscience gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the image of her thin frame and bare feet on the cold asphalt. Against Tom's protests, I switched on the hazard lights and stepped out of the car. The night air was frigid, seeping through my jacket as I called out, "Are you all right?" The only answer was silence. I could just make out her outline further down the road, illuminated faintly by the pulsing glow of my blinkers. She had stopped walking but didn't turn to face me. "Do you need help?" I tried again, louder this time. Then, without warning, she let out a blood-curdling scream. It wasn't the cry of someone frightened or in pain. It was raw, unhinged, almost inhuman. My heart slammed into my ribs as fear rooted me in place. Behind me, I heard Tom yelling for me to get back in the car. The woman's scream didn't stop. It rose and fell like some ghastly wail carried by the wind. I didn't wait to see what she would do next. I ran back to the car, slammed the door shut and hit the gas. The tires squealed as we sped away, the scream still echoing in my ears long after we'd left her behind. To this day, I don't know what we saw that night. Maybe she was a lost soul, a victim of something terrible, or maybe she wasn't even human at all. Whatever the truth is, I never went back to that stretch of road, and I never will. The AIDS story. It was late 2019 when I decided to step out of my comfort zone and join my sixth form's Dungeons and Dragons club. I'd always been shy and struggled to make friends, but I thought this might be a way to find people who shared my interests. To my surprise, I quickly became close with a girl named May. She was kind, a little awkward like me, and shared the same nerdy hobbies I loved. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a best friend. May invited me to join her D&D group, and I was overjoyed. It felt like the start of something good, something normal. At first, things were fun. We spent hours talking about our characters, inside jokes flying back and forth as we planned our next game. The excitement of a new friendship pulled me in, and we began hanging out outside of the group. But when we were alone, something felt different. May would sometimes fall into strange silences, staring at me for a beat too long before cracking a joke in a tone that wasn't quite playful. I brushed it off at first, telling myself it was just the awkwardness of two new friends finding their rhythm. After I left sixth form early due to personal reasons, May became more intense. At first, she would ask to meet up every few days, even though I had started working full-time. When I explained how little free time I had, she didn't seem to understand, or maybe she didn't care. She began asking for photos of my calendar to prove I was busy, and when I sent them, she would guilt-trip me anyway. "I love you, but you're so difficult to see," she'd message, often saying she was crying because I wasn't making time for her. It was strange. We'd only known each other for a few months and had met up alone maybe 5 or 6 times. Yet, she called me her best friend constantly, acting as if we'd been inseparable for years. At first, I chalked it up to her being lonely or overly affectionate, but then she began making comments that sent chills down my spine. "If you don't make time for me, I'll just show up at your house one day and catch you off guard," she joked once. I laughed nervously, unsure if she was serious. Things escalated when May visited my parents' house for the first time. She arrived much later than planned, which was frustrating enough, but her comments about my home made my stomach knot. "Wow, your house is so big," she said at first, but soon her admiration turned sour. "Your parents must shove their wealth in people's faces all the time. Do they even care about people like me?" I hadn't even mentioned my parents' finances or talked about our home. It wasn't something I ever liked discussing, yet she kept circling back to it, her words sharp and accusing. As the night went on, she became even stranger. She asked if I would cuddle with her, telling me I couldn't escape if I tried. When I refused, she laughed in a way that felt forced, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't name. I stayed polite, but every part of me wanted to get her out of the house. The next day, I told her I was too busy to meet up again and hoped she'd get the message. She didn't. Instead, she started jogging past my parents' house daily, sending me messages about how she'd waved, even though I wasn't outside to see her. Then, out of nowhere, she began messaging my boyfriend on social media. I had never even mentioned his name to her, yet she found him and sent him countless texts. "You need my permission to date her because I'm her best friend," she wrote in one message. In another, she insisted, "You have to like me, otherwise you're not good enough for her." My boyfriend showed me the screenshots, his expression uneasy. He'd been polite but distant in his replies, hoping she'd back off. Instead, her messages grew more frequent, more unsettling. When I confronted her, May tried to twist the situation, accusing me of betraying her by talking about her without her consent. I reminded her I hadn't told my boyfriend anything beyond the fact that she was a friend from school. She didn't seem to hear me, her replies shifting rapidly from anger to self-pity. "I love you," she wrote one minute. "You're breaking my heart," came the next. It felt like being caught in a storm I couldn't escape. After she went off to university, things were quiet for a while. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. But during her Christmas break, it all started again. When I didn't respond to her messages for 3 days, she flooded every app I had, Instagram, Snapchat, Discord, with demands to meet. Her texts started out pleading but soon turned furious, her words cutting and relentless. I began to feel genuinely afraid. Would she actually show up at my house uninvited like she'd once joked? In the end, I snapped. I told her that her behavior was creepy and suffocating, that she had no boundaries and was scaring me. I asked her to stop contacting me altogether. Her response was chaotic, apologies tangled with insults, declarations of love laced with manipulation. It was clear she didn't understand why her actions had driven me away. Part of me still feels sorry for her, wishing things could have been different. But another part of me knows this. May wasn't just a friend. She was a storm. And walking away was the only way I could survive. The ninth story. It was the summer after I graduated high school, and life felt like it was opening up before me in a way that was both exciting and terrifying. My best friend and I had decided to celebrate our newfound freedom with a week-long trip to her grandparents' lake house. It was a quaint little place tucked deep into the woods, far from the hum of city life. The house itself was modest, but the view of the water stretching endlessly under the golden summer sun made it feel like paradise. We arrived on a Monday afternoon, our car packed to the brim with snacks, books, and plans for long, lazy days. Her grandparents greeted us warmly before heading off on a trip of their own, leaving the house in our care. That first evening we unpacked and settled in, eating dinner on the back porch as crickets sang, and the scent of pine drifted through the warm air. It felt safe there, the kind of peace you don't find often in life. On the second night, after a day spent swimming and sunbathing, we decided to stay up late and watch movies. It was around midnight when I realized we'd run out of snacks, so we decided to drive into town to grab a few things. The little convenience store was about 15 minutes away, along a winding 2-lane road. The drive there was uneventful, but on the way back the world seemed to shift. The forest lining the road felt darker somehow, the shadows thicker and deeper than they should have been. As we rounded a bend, my friend suddenly hit the brakes. I looked up, startled, and saw why. There was a man standing on the side of the road. He wasn't waving for help or looking at us. He was just standing there, perfectly still, staring into the trees. His presence didn't make sense. We hadn't passed any parked cars, and there were no houses for miles in either direction. "Should we stop?" my friend whispered, her fingers tightening on the steering wheel. I shook my head quickly, my stomach twisting with unease. "No, just keep going." We passed slowly, and as we did, the man turned his head toward us. Even in the faint glow of the headlights, I could see his face was expressionless, his eyes hollow in a way that made my skin crawl. We didn't speak until the house came back into view, its warm light cutting through the oppressive darkness. "Maybe he was hiking," my friend said softly as she parked the car, though her voice lacked conviction. We tried to shake off the encounter, returning to our movie night, but every creak of the old house and every rustle outside set us on edge. Around 2 a.m. as we were finally dozing off in the living room, we heard it, a soft knock at the front door. We froze. It came again, louder this time, echoing through the house like a drumbeat. My friend whispered my name, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't move," I mouthed back. Whoever was outside didn't call out or try to speak. The knocking stopped for a moment, then started again, faster now, more insistent. We crawled quietly to the kitchen and grabbed our phones, but there was no service. The house phone didn't work either. Her grandparents had mentioned earlier in the week that the line had been down for repairs. We sat there in the dark, clutching kitchen knives and listening as footsteps moved slowly around the porch. The sound of someone trying the door handle made my blood run cold. After what felt like hours, the footsteps retreated. We didn't move until dawn. When the sun finally rose, we cautiously peeked out the windows but saw nothing, no footprints, no car, nothing to suggest anyone had been there at all. But when we opened the front door, we found a single muddy handprint smeared across the wood. That was the last night we stayed at the lake house. We packed up and drove home that afternoon, leaving the groceries behind. To this day, neither of us knows who the man on the road was or why he came to the house. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that slow, deliberate knocking in my dreams. And it feels just as real as it did that summer. The 10th story. It was the middle of autumn when I decided to take a solo road trip across the Pacific Northwest. I'd been feeling suffocated by the routines of work and city life, and I craved the kind of silence that only winding mountain roads and dense forests could offer. I packed my car with essentials, warm clothes, snacks, and a few good books, and set off early one Saturday morning. The first few days were everything I'd hoped for. Scenic drives under crisp blue skies, nights spent in cozy roadside motels, and hours of wandering through sleepy little towns where strangers greeted you like an old friend. By the fourth night, I'd driven farther than I expected and found myself in a remote area with no nearby motels. My only option was a small campground nestled among towering evergreens. It was nearly empty when I arrived, with just one other car parked near the entrance and no sign of its occupants. The sun was setting, the air already cold enough to make my breath visible, and I decided to stay rather than risk driving tired on unfamiliar roads. After setting up my small tent and eating a quick dinner of crackers and fruit, I bundled up in layers and settled in for the night. The forest around me was still and quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. At first, the silence felt comforting, like being wrapped in a soft blanket, but as darkness deepened, that comfort began to shift into unease. There's something about being truly alone in the woods that makes every sound seem louder, every shadow stretch farther than it should. Around midnight, I woke with a start. At first, I didn't know why. There was no sound except for the wind whispering through the trees. But then I heard it. A faint crunching of leaves, slow and deliberate, coming from just beyond my tent. My heart thudded in my chest as I strained to listen. The steps moved closer, pausing occasionally as if whoever or whatever it was didn't want to be heard. I fumbled for the flashlight beside me, its narrow beam cutting through the darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound firm. There was no response, but the footsteps stopped. I stayed perfectly still, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles ached. For a long moment, the only sound was my own shallow breathing. Then, just as suddenly as they had begun, the footsteps retreated, fading into the distance until they were swallowed by the wind. I didn't sleep after that. I sat upright in my sleeping bag, flashlight clutched in one hand and a small pocket knife in the other. Every creak of the trees and rustle of leaves sent my imagination spiraling. Was it a curious animal, a lost hiker, or something far worse? I kept telling myself it didn't matter. I'd leave at first light and never return. When dawn finally came, I stepped out of the tent, exhausted but relieved. The forest looked so ordinary in the daylight that I almost laughed at my fear. But as I packed up my gear, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Footprints in the soft dirt circling my tent. They were human, barefoot no less, and they led off into the woods in a meandering pattern, as if the person had been walking aimlessly in the dead of night. I didn't waste any time after that. I threw everything into the car and drove away. The image of those footprints burned into my mind. As I sped down the winding road, I passed the campground's entrance sign and saw the other car still parked in the same spot as the night before. Its windows were fogged, and there was no sign of anyone inside. To this day, I don't know who or what was walking around my tent that night. I tried to tell myself it was just some harmless wanderer, maybe even a sleepwalker. But deep down, I know better. There was something in those slow, deliberate steps that felt wrong, something in the silence of the woods that whispered, "You weren't supposed to be here." 11th story. Or the summer before my final year of college, and I had taken a job as a caretaker for a sprawling estate in a small wooded town. The property had been in the owner's family for generations, but they lived overseas and needed someone to keep an eye on things during the warmer months. I thought it would be perfect, a chance to save some money while enjoying the peace and quiet of the countryside. I spent my days tending to the garden, repairing minor issues around the house, and curling up with books on the back porch as the sun sank below the trees. The house itself was beautiful, but carried the weight of age. Its creaking floors and drafty windows made it feel alive, as though it were breathing around me. During the day this was comforting in a strange way. At night, however, those same creaks and groans seemed louder, sharper, and somehow more intentional. Still, I told myself it was just my imagination and settled into the rhythms of rural life. One evening, after a long day of work, I sat out on the porch with a cup of tea. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the kind of smell that only comes after a light summer rain. I watched fireflies blink lazily over the lawn and felt the stress of city life fade away. As the sky darkened and the crickets began their steady chorus, I noticed something odd. A faint light flickering in the woods just beyond the property line. At first, I thought it might be a camper or someone with a flashlight, but as I watched, the light seemed to dance, weaving in and out of the trees in slow, deliberate patterns. My curiosity won out over caution. Grabbing a flashlight of my own, I slipped on my boots and headed toward the tree line, telling myself I'd just peek and then return to the house. The closer I got, the quieter the night seemed to become. The crickets fell silent, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I paused a few feet from where I'd seen the light, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. Just trees and shadows stretching endlessly into the woods. I let out a small laugh, embarrassed by my own nerves, and turned to head back. That's when I heard it. A low hum, almost like someone murmuring under their breath, drifted through the air. I froze, my flashlight beam shaking slightly as I tried to pinpoint the sound. It was coming from deeper in the woods. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. No reply. Only the soft, steady hum that sent shivers crawling up my spine. I backed away, slowly, unwilling to turn my back on the sound until I reached the edge of the trees. At night, I locked every door and window, something I hadn't bothered doing before. As I lay in bed, the image of that dancing light and the sound of that hum replayed in my mind like an old film reel. Around 2 a.m., I awoke to the sound of footsteps on the porch. They were slow and deliberate, creaking across the wooden boards just outside my bedroom window. My breath caught in my throat as I strained to listen. The footsteps stopped. A long silence followed before the faintest tap-tap-tap on the window broke the stillness. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps retreated, fading into the distance until there was only silence once more. At first light, I packed my things and left the house, calling the owners to let them know I couldn't stay. I told them something had come up back home, but the truth was simpler. I didn't feel safe there anymore. I still don't know who or what was out there that night, and I don't think I ever want to find out.